When we talk about racism and racial violence, we're talking about a human rights problem. When we're dealing with human rights, we must be concerned. The brutal legacy of racialized violence is deeply embedded into our culture and our minds. It's not just a legacy, however. It's an ongoing struggle that continues to afflict people of many races. According to the FBI's 2012 report of hate crime statistics, 48% of single bias crimes reported in America were motivated by race. But whether it's 1% of crimes or 81%, whether it's Black, Hispanic, Native American, white, Asian, or any other race, violence and hatred on the basis of race is unjust and must be removed from our words and our actions. How does one respond theologically to the tragedy of racial violence? Well, as Patrick Chibuko, a Catholic priest from Nigeria, writes, racism is not only a crime, it also violates Christ's command to love one's neighbor as oneself. When race becomes the basis for determining superiority and inferiority, we are ignoring the love of God that created all people. In Genesis, God says, "Let us make humankind in our image." In Revelation, we read, "And there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language. And Jesus himself said, 'You shall love your neighbor as yourself.'" James Cone argues that we must, quote, "relate the message of the cross to our own social reality," end quote. It is then that we will be able to begin the process of racial healing. How can we join in this reconciling work? What can we do to blot out this hatred? Let's start with something at least seemingly simple. Let's remove all racially discriminatory speech from our daily conversations. Even veiled, apparently harmless speech is still hurtful and will have an effect on our overall worldview. Secondly, we have to know what needs reconciling. This means learning or relearning the stories of racism throughout history. Know the stories of Black Americans whose ancestors were slaves and lynching victims. Know the stories of the Native Americans who were and continue to be oppressed. Know the stories of immigrant families who were denied health care, insurance, and work. Outside the American context, know the story of apartheid in South Africa, as well as the stories of the Jewish people during World War II. As a Christian community, our churches need to be places where all who gather are welcomed with love. The church's liturgy and worship should reflect the biblical language of every tribe, tongue, and nation. Clergy should develop liturgical rhythms that reflect racial reconciliation. Our prayers of confession should occasionally revolve around racism. Our music should embrace a variety of ethnic traditions. Pastors should preach God's reconciling word of hope in the midst of suffering. And above all, may our words, thoughts, prayers, worship, conversation, and everything else announce the love of God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who created us to love himself and our neighbor.